Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Trusted Trustee podcast. And as usual, I'm joined by Tracey Besters in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. How are you, Tracey? As usual, it's always good to see you and be with you.
Thank you so much, Darin. I am doing very well, thank you. And it is just a beautiful day here in the Southern Highlands. It's sunny, Darin. It's amazing.
Magnificent. It's sunny here, but it's still not very warm.
No, true. It's not that warm here either, actually, but it's sunny. So, fingers crossed it'll get warmer. It is summer after all.
It is too, yeah. We have ticked over in the summer. What sort of summer is this? Off to a bad start, as Tony Gregg once said. Uh, And of course, we have a sponsor supporting this podcast. It's brought to you by Superfund Property Valuations. Take the tension out of tax time by making Superfund Property Valuations your number one choice for all your SMSF property valuation requirements. Order a report today by filling in your details online at superfundpropertyvaluations.com.au and let Superfund Property Valuations take care of the hard work. And as usual, a shout out to William Spark and his team there. I'm sure if they're looking to wrap things up for the calendar year, they'll be working very hard in order to do that and get all those valuations in line. And of course, we've got a bit of a time frame now for Division 296. So I'm sure that will be building to a crescendo as we approach 1st of July 2026. But we're not here to talk about valuations or just slightly. We're actually going to talk about the investment strategy in this episode and some of the issues, I suppose, that you've seen with the questions that you've been asked about this whole compliance area for an SMSF, aren't we,
Yeah.
Tracy?
We are, Darren, and I think that investment strategy seems like a bit of a kind of topic really in some respects, and certainly for me, it's one of the most crucial parts of the SMSF puzzle. And I think that the more questions I'm asked about this, the more questions I see raised on forums about this, and some of the real life examples we'll talk about in the next half an hour or whatever. People don't get it. People are still not understanding, or some people, I shouldn't say people in general, but some people are not really kind of connecting the dots between the compliance part of the SMSF strategy and the practical part of the SMSF investment strategy. So, yeah, I thought we'd have a chat about that.
Yeah, I've always found that whoever looks at the investment strategy and the guidelines around it, the regulators have got off to a bad start because I'm still pretty sure there's a statement in there to say that you don't actually have to write it down.
Yeah.
So if you put that in there, it kind of, I don't know, there's a perception of, oh, it can't be that serious if we don't have to write it down. It's all right, Tracy, I've got it all up here in my head. It's all
Yeah.
sorted out. Now, of course, the practicality, we laugh because the practicality does suggest that, well, how, how can you be held to account against your investment strategy if you don't write it down, right? And,
Exactly.
and more to the point, the auditors are going to want to have a look at this. So,
Yeah.
you know, they can't, even if they take a CAT scan of your brain, they won't be able to see the investment strategy if you have it in your mind. So you really have no choice but to write it down, even though there is no obligation for you to actually write it down.
Yes, and just to clarify that, Darren, it doesn't specifically say in the SIS Act or the SIS regs, for that matter, that you don't have to write it down. It says that you must give effect to formulate and give effect to. So it doesn't say you must formulate in writing and give effect to. So it's silent in that regard,
Yeah,
which did lead to a whole conversation over the years of around, well, it doesn't have to be in writing. So therefore, how do you prove that I don't have one?
yeah,
Because I do have one, like you said, up in my mind. The ATO have come out since then and said, look, we won't accept a verbal investment strategy. And so it does need to be in writing for all of the reasons that you've mentioned, Darren, that the auditor has to be able to see it. And if you are a single member fund, maybe that's okay. But if you have other members in the fund, well, I don't know about you, but, how do I know that someone else that I'm in in an SMSF with, how do I know what the strategy is if they haven't told me and we haven't actually communicated it, written it down? So it saves a whole lot of arguments having it written down. Now, the thing with writing it down is that you probably should follow it. If you're actually going to put
I
something in writing, like you probably should
think
actually
so.
follow what you've put in writing, right? So otherwise there might be a few issues with the ATO and the auditors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that formality does come with the perceived obligation that you do have to write these things down for
Yeah.
some reason that people take a little bit more seriously if you have to write it down. But it's not just, as you say, it's not just writing it down, it's actually adhering to it as well. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about the Billabong case or the merchant case. And
Mm.
one of the issues that was raised in that one, I think we might have spoken about this before, was that one of the things he was picked up on compliance-wise is that he didn't adhere to his investment strategy. Well, number one, I think it had been ignored for a number of years. And it was
Yeah.
patently obvious because in the investment strategy, there was no instruction to say that the fund could hold property, and yet
Yeah.
it held a property. So
Mm.
we're not talking about, when we have discussions about investment strategy, we're not actually talking about, rocket science where I read it at face value and there's no way I could have perceived that it meant that. So how could I adhere to the investment strategy if I didn't know specifically that it meant that? We're not
Yeah.
talking about that sort of level. We're talking about just on the surface, it says yes, yay or nay. And there are a lot of instances where it doesn't say you can, and trustees have just gone ahead and done it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's kind of two camps, Darren, with the investment strategy argument. There is the make it very, very specific strategy, or there is the don't make it specific at all because then we can't run foul of anything. Camp, there's like there's these two schools of thought or two camps. And I think that neither one of those are great. I've had situations in the past where I've taken on new SMSFs and their investment strategy had asset allocations. So we'll talk about asset allocations. It had asset allocations in there, but when you looked at the funds and in the report pack of the fund, none of the assets actually match the asset allocation. So it's kind of like, well, you might as well say, okay, give me a slap on the wrist already because I'm just telling you, auditor, that I haven't actually adhered to my investment strategy. So there's that kind of school of thought. Or there's another school of thought, which is don't put any asset allocation percentages in at all, ranges in at all, because then you can't actually fall foul of that. So you have everything available to you in your investment strategy. Is that really a strategy, though?
Yeah,
That's the question. Is it really a
not
strategy if
really.
you're
I
just
mean,
open to everything?
exactly. I mean, if you just have an investment strategy to say that my SMSF can invest in the broad universe of any investment that's
Yeah.
out there, it's actually meaningless. But by the same token, so the asset allocations you're talking about, Tracy, is where an investment strategy actually specifies that, the fund can hold, I don't know, 40% to 10% of the portfolio in Australian equities. And
Yes,
of
exactly.
course, that's all very nice because you can then say to the auditor, see, look, I've taken this seriously and I've got a plan to say which
Yeah.
asset classes I want to favor and, want more representation in my investment portfolio. The only problem with that is, and I'm sure you see this all the time, Tracy, is that in some ways you're making a rod for your own back. I
Yeah.
mean, as we know, well, if your investment strategy is successful and the investments that you're allocated to are good ones, you know that there should be capital growth in them, which
Hmm.
basically means that the value is going to hopefully forever increase. Now, with that increase, and if you keep topping up that portion of your portfolio, simple mathematics would suggest that it's going to start to reach that upper level. Or conversely, if it falls, it might reach the
Yes.
lower limit. And then all
Yes.
of a sudden you've got to rejig all of your affairs to make it comply with your investment strategy. It kind of makes a rod for your own back, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, Darren. And you can certainly change your investment strategy as frequently as you want to as well, right? So you could say, if you wanted to, you could have a range of asset allocation to say, Australian shares 10% to 40%. And then if they actually go to 60%, then you don't necessarily have to sell down 20% to get below 40%. You can change your strategy. So there's two ways of doing it. So I'm not a huge fan of having specific percentage ranges of asset allocation on my investment strategies, just because of the administration issues that we've talked about, that we could easily get outside of that range. And then you've got to be questioned around, well, why you're not adhering to your strategy. However, I do think that ultimately, if you're the trustee of the SMSF, you're making those decisions anyway, aren't you? Like you're actually saying, well, I'm not saying in any of my investments that I've made with my husband, we don't just go, oh, we'll just throw a dart and wing it and see what happens. We're actually making conscious choices as to how we're investing our money. And so, therefore, we have had conversations about, well, we only want to have this sort of exposure to that particular asset class. So, I think that if we're making these decisions anyway as the trustees of our super funds, then it doesn't have there's no harm in documenting that. That's the whole point.
Yeah, 100%. But there are some nuances that you want to talk about, aren't
Yeah.
there, Tracy? I mean, that's sort of some of the more common things. But one thing that it is stipulated that you have to take into account, and that's the liquidity of the fund when
Yeah.
you do formulate and maybe review your investment strategy. What sort of considerations need to be taken into account when looking to satisfy that component?
Yeah, look, liquidity is one of those things that I just see quite frequently, Darren, in terms of the investment strategy. You're required to actually take into consideration liquidity when you formulate the investment strategy. And when you review it regularly and you give effect to, you have to take into consideration liquidity. Risk, diversification, and liquidity are the three main components that you have to take into consideration. Now, liquidity is an interesting one because a lot of the questions for when people set up their SMSF, it'll be around, should I buy one property or two properties? Or should I, put 90% into this one particular property? Or should I do this or should I do that? And every single one of those questions actually takes into consideration liquidity, even if the trustee isn't putting their mind to the concept of liquidity at that point, by virtue of the practical implications, right? So, because if you put 90% or 100% into property, well, and the property is negatively geared, well, all right, you have a liquidity issue. And so I think that we've got to keep giving effect to this liquidity consideration. So liquidity comes into play just day-to-day running of the fund. So, for example, if I've set up my SMSF, I'm not putting contributions in for whatever reason. My contributions are going to another fund. And then I have this dwindling cash element of my SMSF. I might have a property with a borrowing in it. If I start to incur things like late fees on ASIC or GIC from the GIC from the ATO because I haven't been able to pay my tax bill, maybe I've got some strata fees and I haven't paid them, so now I'm being taken to debt collection, et cetera, et cetera. All of these are real life examples, by the way. I'd have to then start questioning, do I have the appropriate amount of liquidity within my investment strategy structure? And if I don't, then I've got to come back to, well, what are we going to do in the SMSF? How are we going to get more funds in? So it's not just a document for compliance purposes. We've really got to use this investment strategy documentation and the strategy that we've put together for making our everyday decisions.
No, absolutely. And you have to take into account also the status of your SMSF, as in if you've got, well, even if you've only got one member, but if you've got a couple of members,
Yeah.
what sort of interest do they have? Do they have a pension interest? Because
Correct.
obviously liquidity is going to be a big thing then because they've got to make minimum pension payments for the year. And if you don't have sufficient liquid funds or cash in order to do that, then you're going to be in a little bit of compliance issue and or
Yeah.
trouble, and then you're probably going to have to rejig what you have to do in order to satisfy some of those compliance obligations that you will have to do throughout the year.
Yeah. That's exactly right, Darren. And so liquidity does, yeah, it's pensions, when pensions need to commence or when they want to commence, that's a liquidity issue. If there is some sort of death of a member, obviously that's a big liquidity issue because that is something, massive draw out of the fund at some point in time. But also kind of, if a member's injured, and that's where the whole insurance component of the investment strategy comes in as
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
So it's not just, insurance is a required consideration of the investment strategy. Again, going back to the SIS Act and the SIS regs, you have to consider insurance. Doesn't mean that you have to have insurance for the members within the SMSF, but you at least need to show that you've considered it. So if you've got a property, you've got borrowing in the SMSF, there is no insurance component, but yet look, your liquidity is really low. Again, have you really given effect to, have you formulated and have you reviewed that strategy to show that you've actually taken into consideration all of those things? I kind of struggle with the fact of how you can show that you've done all of those things when the practical side of it is, well, cross, 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 cross. And so that's the argument to have.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it's kind of along those lines a little bit. The investment strategy doesn't necessarily have to be rigid.
No,
So a
exactly.
while ago, the ATO did flag some funds who were single asset funds, mainly property,
Yeah,
and they sent letters out to the trustees to pretty much say, look, is your investment strategy in line with what you've done? And it wasn't, they weren't saying, or the ATO wasn't saying that you can't do it. It
no,
was just a matter of, okay, this is a bit of a high risk strategy because you've only got one asset in your SMSF. Have you acknowledged the risks? Do you know you've only got one asset? Does your investment strategy take that into account? And how are you sort of managing these things? And of course, that's great if you can adhere to that because I'm assuming, well, I should make the assumption that if you do have a single asset in your SMSF, you know something, you know a lot actually about that asset in order to invest in it and enjoy the capital growth as well as the income that's being generated from that asset. I would hate
yeah,
to think that you just went into it, got one asset, and didn't know what you were doing. And of course, that is exactly what the ATO is trying to guard against, is people
sure.
doing. But of course, the flexibility stands that if you're really, have a great expertise in property, say for example, then go for your life and you can really make it work. You've just got to prove or acknowledge that, yeah, I know what the risks are. That
Yeah,
this is what I'm looking at. This is what I put in place to try and mitigate that. And it's a little bit the same as the insurance thing, where you are obligated to consider it, but then you say that,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, I've considered it. I don't have any dependents or whatever, so I don't actually think, and I'm not working anymore, so I don't actually think that, well, income protection or whatever risk insurance we're talking about isn't applicable,
yeah.
and you move
Yeah,
on.
exactly. Exactly, Darren. And the ATO, you're 100% right. The ATO, part of the whole formulating, giving effect to with the investment strategy in the covenants is diversification. And have we actually considered diversification? Now, that doesn't mean you have to have, a 10% here and 10% there and 10% here and rah. It doesn't mean that. It means that you have to have actually considered it. And you're 100%, the ATO did communicate with everyone who had a single asset, or I think it was more than 90% maybe of their of their portfolio in one asset. They wrote to all of those trustees to say, why? Have you thought about why? The ATO can't dictate to you, and nor should anybody dictate to you what your asset choices are. This is the whole point of having a self-managed super fund, and even spreading further into the wider superannuation community and industry. This is why you can choose to have different types of investments or different investment options. No one says you have to be balanced. Define balanced. What does that mean? So no one says that you must do something. you have to have shown that you've reasonably thought about it though. Like you have considered it and you have got an understanding why. And I think that, particularly those SMSFs that set up in the early days to buy property probably have a very high concentration into that one asset or that one asset class. And maybe over time, that diversification will spread a bit further as they build up more liquidity into the fund. But you still have to have a reasoning behind that. You've got the plan of attack, if you like, to build that up. And it's coming back to that prudent person, isn't it, Darin? Like in the covenants, it says that the trustee must act honestly and as a prudent person would. So a prudent person, you've just got to, put that layer over everything that you do inside of the SMSF. And it kind of, property is, we've focused a bit on property, but crypto is the other thing, right? So we're seeing
Yes.
a fairly
Yes.
large cohort of people who are now setting up SMSFs to invest in crypto, and all the power to them if that's what they want to do. Again, that choice is there, that decision is there. You still have the same considerations around the investment strategy and what does that look like. And if the diversification is not there immediately because you've invested a large portion of the fund in crypto, you still have to have a reason why. You have to be able to genuinely explain this is the reasons why I've chosen to do X, Y, and Z, and document that in your investment strategy, because no doubt the auditor will ask about that. And if the auditor will ask, then so will the ATO if it comes down to that.
Yeah, just as an aside, just on that point,
Yeah.
Tracy, this is several SMSF Association national conferences ago, but there was a discussion around what were the most sort of bizarre assets being held and potentially
Yeah.
what were some of the more successful assets being held in an SMSF, unusual successful. And I
Yeah.
remember I think one of the most successful SMSF for returns, the trustee only invested in lace materials. So we're talking
Yeah.
about lace for fashion, that sort of
Yes.
stuff. Obviously would have had to have a component of cash, but predominantly, as you say, probably the 90%
Mhm.
allocation to lace, and absolutely knocked it out of the park.
There you go.
So again, it goes back to, do you back yourself with your expertise if you think that you're all over it and no one can do it better than you can, or at least I'm so confident that I'll definitely make this work, then yeah, there's no reason why you can't do it. And I will disagree with you in one area. No, you say no one can tell you what to invest in. Well, Jim Chalmers might be having a bit of a say in that later, but that's a discussion for another day.
Well, true, Darin, true. And I did kind of say that with thought in the back of my mind that that's my view, that no one should be able to tell you what you should invest in. It's your money
100%.
after all. You should be able to do
Yes,
it. So.
100%. 100%. So do
And
you
you,
have any other, sorry, Trace, I
no,
spoke.
no, please, please.
No, I was just going to say, you're on the front line, so can you share any other investment strategy war stories that we love
Yeah, yeah.
about where some of the confusion might lie and where some people desperately need some guidance as to, can I do this? Can I not do this? What should I do?
Yeah. Look, I do have a number, Darin, and I think that I just wanted to take your example of what you shared about SMSF Association conferences from years ago. A number of them are years ago, and the types of investments. So I think that we kind of get caught up into mainstream investments and mainstream asset allocations here. But the lace example is a perfect one. Liquidity might be an issue. Can you sell off a meter of lace to fund something? That might be a problem. I don't know how you go about doing that. I've certainly seen funds with rock lobster pots, that sort of
Oh,
abalone licenses, all of that sort of kind of interesting thing. Book royalties, it's sitting inside of the super funds. Lots of gold, lots of collectibles, of course, all of those things that kind of are outside of the mainstream, but certainly valid investments if that's what you choose to have. You've just got to factor all of those idiosyncrasies within those particular investments into the mix. And if you don't, that's when you're going to fall foul, because the auditor will review your investment strategy each and every year of the fund, and the auditor will say, "Wait a second, Darin. The investment strategy that you showed us and this, those don't agree. So why?" And do you have another investment strategy that you haven't told us about, or why you're not, giving effect to your own strategy? So it's just those kind of times where the war stories come when it's like you've done this investment strategy, you've got this beautiful 6-page document or 7-page document or 1-page document, whatever it is, you've popped it in the drawer and then you don't think about it again. And that's where the problem arises.
Tracy, when the auditor does pick up a bit of an anomaly, is there
Yeah.
any sort of time frame that trustees have to look at in order to rectify, that issue?
Yeah, look, most of the time that I've had that problem, the auditor has been quite flexible in the sense of, make sure you've updated your investment strategy because there's, as far as I'm aware, there is no fixed time frame of a certain number of days that you've got to get that sorted. They're raising it. This strategy doesn't seem to adhere to what you're doing, or you haven't adhered to the strategy. Make sure you get it fixed up there. If you don't ever get it fixed up, then you're going to have kind of the issue that Mr. Marchant found.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
Mm.
his was a pretty obvious one, as I said, that the
Yeah.
investment strategy didn't allow for a property to be held in the fund, and yet he had an investment property in the fund. So that's
Yeah,
a
look,
that's
it's
a
more
bit
of an issue.
obvious.
Yeah, it's more of an issue, Darin, when the investment, like you said in that situation, it's not so much of an issue where you've got a whole range of assets that are allowed to be inside of the fund. It's more of an issue when the investment strategy is silent on it. So i.e., property is not included in the list. Or it might specifically, I've actually seen a situation where it specifically said the SMSF will not invest in blah. And then it did. So it's like, well, hang on, how did you figure that? Like, how did that work? Why are you saying you can't do it and then you are doing it? So I think the biggest risk comes though, when we're talking investment strategies, we're not just talking about problems with the auditor or the ATO, because if you've actually got a relationship breakdown, so let's just say, hypothetically speaking, I may have come across this case before, but hypothetically speaking, you've got husband and wife in the SMSF. Husband has been predominantly the decision maker. Wife has just gone along with it. The investment strategy said one thing, and then the super fund went and did something else on the instructions of the husband. Then you may actually have kind of a liability issue for one of the trustees if they've gone against the investment strategy, particularly if they've lost money. So investment strategy might have been shares and cash, husband's gone and done something else, or one trustee's gone and done something else, lost some money, not a very, nasty relationship breakdown. Can one party sue the other? Because they haven't adhered to the investment strategy. That's a question for the litigation lawyers, but I wouldn't put past them.
Yeah, no, highly litigious. Every area of SMSF continues to be highly litigious. And
Yeah.
as I always say, we only see more legal cases being brought about. We never see a reduction in the legal cases. And just a final point on that
Yeah.
Billabong case. One of the things I know it seems ridiculous, but one of the things to come out of he had an investment property when the investment strategy didn't allow for that to happen. It was also obvious that he didn't review his investment strategy often because naturally enough, if you review it, it's a pretty obvious thing that you'd pick it up. So
Yeah.
how often do you have to review it? Yearly? Would it
Yeah,
be
look,
yearly?
generally yearly. It just says review regularly in the covenants and the legislation. So my suggestion is that you at least review it yearly, preferably before you give everything to the accountant and the auditor. That would probably be ideal. But any time that you make a change to your investments, so if you've got a financial advisor and you're meeting with that advisor quarterly, for example, and you're changing strategy quarterly, then just pick up the investment strategy, have a bit of a look at it. If you're meeting more regularly than that, it's not a big deal to change the investment strategy. Like most accountants would have given, or financial advisors have given their investment strategy templates to clients in a Word doc. So you've got the template. It's not going to be that hard to change it. And we're not talking massive changes. You don't have to go into never-ending amounts of detail in the investment strategy, Darin. You need to cover off the main components that we've talked about, but you don't have to go any further than that. So if your investment strategy has an objective, and the objective of your fund might be to be a certain percentage above CPI, or a certain, 4% over 10 years return, or whatever it is, whatever the objective is that you've come up with for your fund. It might be that it's going to provide a retirement income of X amount of dollars, whatever that objective is that you've come up with. Make sure you've looked at risk. That you have, if you've done kind of some sort of risk assessment, if you've got multiple members in a fund, the investment strategy needs to take into consideration the risk profile of each of the members. And this is where some of the intergenerational things can become a bit tricky, because the older generation may have a lower risk tolerance than the younger generation. And I'm stereotyping there, as obviously, because it could be the reverse, depending on the situation of the families. You've got to take into consideration risk, diversification for sure, liquidity, and insurance. But you don't have to go any further than that. So you can have a situation where the investment strategy says, my SMSF may invest in shares, cash, gold, crypto, property, and any other investment that the trustee chooses. Like, it could be quite broad. It doesn't specifically have to mention asset ranges for each of those asset classes. That's not a requirement. So you can make it quite simple. And the more simple it is, I guess, the easier it is to update.
Yeah, 100%. So I think we've touched on all of the main issues with the
Yeah,
investment strategy, and as usual, we've spoken so much we've run out of time.
of course.
So I just wanted to thank you for your time today. As usual, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you, Darin. And I think that, all of our SMSF trustees will have some time over the Christmas holidays in Australia to review their investment strategies, Darin, and they'll, be sitting by the pool with a mojito and their investment strategy, and I'll be having a look at what it means.
Oh, a great time to do it because who doesn't review their life in general come New Year's Eve and make some New Year's resolutions? So maybe one of them can be updating your investment strategy
There you
along the way
go. Tick
for
that
your
box.
self-managed super fund. Anyway, thank you again, Tracy. Thank you to Alex and my production team for putting this together, for publishing on all of our social media sites and via email, obviously, to our readership. Thank you also to Superfund Property Valuations for their continued support. But most importantly, thank you to you for joining us. Again, I always say this. We hope you get as much enjoyment and a lot of information out of this, but at least as much enjoyment as we enjoy putting it together for you. So until then, there's one episode to go, I believe, before Christmas, and that's already a frightening thought for me. But
You
but
do.
apart from that, we will see you one to go before Christmas. And until the next episode, travel safely and bye for now.
Bye for now. Take care.